In this presentation, you will be given a history of damage prevention legislation efforts in Alberta by Utility Safety Partners, USP, and their efforts to secure future comprehensive legislation surrounding the registration of buried and overhead utilities. The Alberta One Call Location Corporation, now known as Utility Safety Partners, started offering services to Albertans in October 1984, relieving them of the responsibility to locate buried energy and utility assets on their own. Over the years, more than 850 owners and operators of those assets have registered their infrastructure locations with Utility Safety Partners, and the organization has processed over 10 million locate requests since its inception. In November 1998, the Federation of Alberta Gas Co-ops was looking to enact legislation that would require all underground facility owners to become members and register their facilities with Alberta One Call. In May of 1999, a survey was conducted showing support for legislation from key stakeholders, homeowners, buried utility members, and the digging community, with support at 68, 87, and 92% respectively. Months later, in September of 1999, the Alberta One Call Board of Directors passed a motion to create a multi-stakeholder task force to determine if legislation should be enacted and to develop a framework. In November of that same year, the Alberta Association of Municipal Districts and Counties passed a resolution to encourage the Alberta provincial government to implement the legislation and require registration with Alberta First Call. From the beginning of 2000 to October 2001, various task force meetings were held to create a position paper which was delivered to the Alberta government, after which the Alberta One Call president secured a meeting with the Minister of Municipal Affairs. From their meetings, the task force concluded that Alberta required a set of concise guidelines for anyone planning ground disturbances so that they would understand what their responsibilities are in terms of the safety of themselves and others, the environment and other buried facilities, and how they should interact with buried facility owners. In the mid-2000s, the Alberta Energy Resources Conservation Board, now known as the Alberta Energy Regulator, required all provincially regulated transmission pipelines to register the location of their buried pipelines with Alberta One Call Corporation, and required any person conducting a ground disturbance within 30 meters of those assets to submit a locate request to Alberta One Call. As a result of this new legislation, membership with Alberta One Call substantially increased. In 2016, the National Energy Board, now the Canada Energy Regulator, released the damage prevention regulations mandating all federally regulated transmission pipelines to register the location of their buried pipelines with One Call services nationwide, and required any person conducting a ground disturbance within 30 meters of those assets to submit a locate request to those One Call centers. In 2018, following active engagement by the Alberta Common Ground Alliance, the Alberta government enacted the Alberta Underground Infrastructure Notification System Consultation Act to develop a report of recommendations enabling the Alberta government to determine the correct path forward when it comes to comprehensive provincial damage prevention legislation. In 2019, the NDP party lost their majority government in Alberta following the general election, effectively eliminating this act. As it stands today, federally and provincially regulated transmission pipelines in Alberta must register the location of those buried assets with Utility Safety Partners, and any person conducting a ground disturbance within 30 meters of those transmission pipelines must submit a locate request to USP at least 3 days prior to excavation. Outside of federally or provincially regulated transmission pipelines, registering buried energy and utility assets with Utility Safety Partners is commonly referred to as voluntary or optional. Additionally, while the requirement to locate and mark buried utilities prior to a ground disturbance appears in Alberta's Occupational Health and Safety Code, commencing that process through a locate request to USP is only a suggested, although highly recommended, starting point. In 2019, the Alberta One Call Corporation became Utility Safety Partners after absorbing and unifying the services of the Alberta Common Ground Alliance and the Where's the Line campaign. Once joined, Utility Safety Partners re-established the Government Relations Committee and began drafting damage prevention legislation. The first draft of the proposed damage prevention legislation was released for a 30-day comment period in early 2022. The proposed language included mandatory registration of buried and overhead energy and utility assets with USP. In June of that same year, Utility Safety Partners was approached by the Alberta Road Builders and Heavy Construction Association with a request to establish a bilateral working group to conduct an in-depth review of the second draft of the proposed legislation. Towards the end of 2022, the United Conservative Party, after reviewing the proposal, contacted Utility Safety Partners and proposed the legislation could be included in an omnibus bill in early 2023 if certain changes were made. Those changes were removing 2 challenging clauses, penalties and enforcement, and a reference to a damage prevention advisory panel, and if utility safety partners would be willing to require all buried and overhead utilities be registered with the Alberta government rather than utility safety partners. An agreement was made to remove the clauses, but not to register locations with the Alberta government. The current and future priorities for utility safety partners includes the mobilization of grassroots campaigns to reinforce industry support for damage prevention legislation, active and continual provincial engagement, as well as a formal request for action with the goal of legislation being tabled in the winter 2024 session, recruitment of unsigned municipalities, which is currently at approximately 140, and instituting a 5-year grace period for new and reticent municipalities. Working on revising the language of the Alberta Operational Health and Safety Code to mandate locate requests through utility safety partners, and continued brand promotion and relationship building with influencers and decision makers. If you are interested or wish to know more about Alberta's damage prevention path forward, please visit the Committees tab on our website, utilitysafety.ca. You can also email us at info@utilitysafety.ca.